about 3.5 years ago, in the sort of the height of the pandemic, the darker days of the pandemic, I had a bit of an epiphany. Not the religious type, this type. A moment of sudden and great realization that something was wrong. And what I sort of observed is, and then the conclusion I came to with this epiphany, is that there's a major systemic problem in global industry. And when I say global industry, I mean all of it, all sectors, from oil and gas, pharmaceutical, food and beverage, whatever vertical industry, automotive you're looking at. I mean all of it, and it's a problem inside the manufacturer and a problem with the supplier ecosystem that supply to the manufacturer. So it's a big problem. And basically the status quo that has developed in, my 35 years or so in manufacturing, and a bit longer than that probably, predates me getting into industry. But the status quo that's developed, I don't think is fit for purpose. And if we don't have a bit of a paradigm shift in the way that we approach industry, then we're not going to achieve our objectives. I mean, individually as an organization, personally, me, and then from a global perspective, climate change, etc., for my children, we will just not achieve what we're trying to achieve, which is a bit concerning. But in terms of, well, what did I come up to? What's my credentials? Why can I see something that others can't see? And I think it's a direct result of my career, which is very odd. I am an odd person, generally speaking, but my career is even odder than I am. Because basically, so this column are the companies I've worked for, and that side are the people I've worked with when I was working with those companies. So I started in manufacturing. The first thing I tell people is, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a consultant, and I'm not an IT person either. My background is marketing, and actually my education was fine art, painting. So go figure how I ended up doing Industry 4. But I started in a manufacturing company back in the late 80s, early 90s, and we supplied GE when Jack Welch was in charge, so everything was about Six Sigma, black belts, green belts. So I got a really good understanding of manufacturing, supply chains, demand planning, quality issues, various other things, global shipments into Far East and other places. And they also put an ERP system in, which was a disaster, but you learn more from the bad ones than the good ones. I decided this manufacturing IT stuff is quite interesting. So I moved out of manufacturing into the technology sector, but not at the ERP level. I started at the shop floor systems level with PLC, SCADA, DCS, working for a small automation system integrator. From there, I then was head of MES business development at Wonderware, which is now Aviva in EMEA, now part of Schneider Electric. It was Invensys at the time. But back then, in around about 2005, Wonderware were partnering with SAP on a concept at the time based on some acquisitions that SAP made called the perfect plant. And the perfect plant concept was a precursor to Industry 4. It was basically the idea of a fully integrated end-to-end supply chain, ERP, right down to the manufacturing assets and back again, bi-directional communication, etc. From Wonderware, I then moved to Atos, who are a global system integrator on the IT side. So they do the Olympics, is their claim to fame. So I was global head of MES there. They're also 15% owned by Siemens. So I was involved with the Siemens Digital Factory, Siemens MindSphere, and became part of the Industry 4 team when Industry 4 became a thing. Unfortunately, I'm so old, it wasn't a thing when I was starting working in my career, but it came to fruition then. And then from Atos, I spent 2 years at EY. And again, if anyone knows EY, they have a global partnership with Procter & Gamble around P&G's IWS, the Integrated Work System, which is regarded as the sort of Toyota production system for CPG companies. And EY's partnership with P&G is to basically go and rip out a client's operational excellence program and put P&G's IWS into the manufacturer. So people like British American Tobacco, Bridgestone were typical clients that we worked with at EY. Then I spent 3 years at SAP. I went to the dark side, where I was responsible for the manufacturing portfolio in Industry 4.now, which was their take on Industry 4 from a strategy perspective. I was part of the Digital Supply Chain Center of Excellence for EMEA North as a region. So I spent 3 years there. And then in September 2022, I joined Kearney, which was AT Kearney, rebranded, as head of Industry 4 for Europe. So that's who I've worked for and the partners I've worked with. In terms of the manufacturers that I've worked with over the last 30 years or so, again, the key takeaway from this slide is I'm not stuck in one industry. I'm quite comfortable in continuous batch, discrete, highly complex engineer to order like submarines and jet engines through to regulated industries, quite comfortable with the different manufacturing types. And I've also been incredibly lucky to do this job globally. So I've traveled all over the world, usually at my employer's expense, going to meet clients like Nestle and Veve, all down into Asia Pacific. And that was an AB InBev visit on the photograph that I finished with. Not just because Adam's there. If you watched, I've used this photo so many times. But the key takeaway from these two slides is my career is unusual because I've seen manufacturing from all layers, from every part of the ecosystem, from inside the manufacturer, and then every layer of supplier. And the thing that I've observed in these organizations is to get to the very top of SAP or to become a partner at Kearney or EY, you tend to find that those people have been there 25, 30 years in the same organization, or at least in the same sector, like ERP software, which I admire. I respect that enormously, but it does lead to a bit of institutionalization. They can only see the world through their viewpoint, and manufacturing's bigger than that. So I think the reason I moved around is I kept thinking, no, these have not got the answer. These have not got the answer. So what is this systemic problem that I'm referring to? So just to explain what that is. Regardless of the KPI of the day, and obviously sustainability is a hot topic now, but a few years ago it would have been plastic in the ocean. Before that, the financial crash. Before that, the dot-com bubble, shareholder value. It doesn't matter what the KPI is. The thing that manufacturers have always been trying to do is this, performance improvement. They just want to be quicker, better, faster, cheaper, more profitable. So all those companies that I've worked with over the 30 years, what I've observed them all do, all their efforts towards performance improvement have basically boiled down to 4 things, 4 big strategic things that they've done with an objective of performance improvement. So the first one that they've done is strategy. And what I mean by strategy is that's the work that they do with MBB, you know, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Accenture, the other consulting firms. And the strategy work is around things like mergers, acquisitions, divestments, where to build their new plants, which products to bring to market, which markets to serve. It's not really to do with technology, it's the direction of the company and where they're going with that. And again, the objective is performance improvement. The second thing that all those manufacturers have done is introduce operational excellence, a bit of a lag on this one, but operational excellence into their manufacturing. So if you walk around most manufacturing shop floors, you'll usually see a Greek temple on the wall with things like autonomous maintenance, 5S, focused improvement, whatever it may be. That's the sort of total production system or the IWS methodology. And again, the whole objective of operational excellence is, again, driving out waste out of the business and making them better performing. The third thing that they've all done to improve their business are big investments in IT. So ERP systems, CRM systems, HR systems, the things that the CIO buys for the business, which is usually in the carpeted areas and usually the white collar people that are using those sort of big software IT systems. And then the fourth area that all those manufacturers have invested in to improve performance is in their operational technologies on the shop floor inside the factories themselves. So again, process control systems, automation, AGVs, robots, whatever it may be. But the OT systems are sold to engineers. Now, every CXO I speak to will tell you that all 4 areas have delivered performance improvement. They're definitely better performing than they were, but they'd all tell you also that none of the 4 have fully delivered on expectations. They've not quite taken the business to where they wanted to get to from a performance perspective. So that begs the question, why? And part of the problem with the status quo is the internal silos inside the organization, those internal dynamics. Because the board who work with McKinsey, BCG, et cetera, on the strategy, that becomes the business's 5-year plan. And that's cascaded to the business. It's like, hey guys, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going, go do, deliver. Operations are trying to deliver that, and they rely on things like operational excellence methodologies, value stream mapping, and other things to try and figure out how to deliver what the business wants strategically. But to do that, you need analytics, you need information, you need data, you need applications to help the people make better decisions about what's the right next thing to do. And internally, the business looks in 2 directions for answers. So one is the CIO and IT, and they will typically go to SAP and their ecosystem of suppliers for answers. But the CIO doesn't build a chemical production plant or a brewery or an automotive production line. It's engineers who do that. Chemical, mechanical, electrical, process engineers. And the sad truth is IT and engineering just do not collaborate very well in most manufacturing organizations. And in some cases, it's outright competition. Essentially to provide the same solution that does the same thing. One prefers SAP, one prefers Siemens or Rockwell or GE. So there's a bit of an impasse inside the organization. So there are some internal dynamics and silos to break down. But then when you look at the external dynamics in the supplier ecosystem, it's a mirror image of the same problem. Because you have the MBBs, the pure consultants, the big 4, the Accentures of this world, they're all targeting the board, the CXOs. They want to be the board's trusted advisor in the ear of the board and helping, direct that company. In the IT ecosystem, it's a slightly different ecosystem. And even if the logos are the same, trust me, I've worked for them, it's a different group of people inside the organization that are selling to the CIO. And I think the numbers show that the CIO's spend is about 2.5% of a company's revenue annually is spent on IT systems. So it's quite a large budget to go after. But as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, selling to engineers is a very different ecosystem. It's the OEMs, it's Tetra Pak, Krones in the food and beverage industry. Again, Siemens, Schneider, the MES vendors, the process control, the DCS vendors, depending on which industry we're talking about. And then operational excellence is back to boutique consulting capabilities that go in and teach people how to do lean, etc. So this is what I mean about the supplier ecosystem is a mirror image of the client's internal problem, where you have domains of expertise and knowledge, but each domain doesn't actually know too much about the other domain's knowledge or capability. And then the next problem with the status quo is manufacturing is a complex system. So if you take something like sustainability and think of every layer of this cake has an impact on sustainability, and if you audited a client and said, so who are your strategic consultants? What is your ERP? Who's your hyperscale? You'll probably find not just this many logos, but a lot more logos at each layer of capability. And the simple truth is not one logo on that slide can deliver sustainability. McKinsey can't do it on their own. SAP can't do it on their own. Microsoft can't do it on their own. No one vendor can deliver it because you need a thin slice of the whole lot and services and technologies. It's not an easy problem to fix. And then the next problem with the current status quo engagement model that I've observed is the way that manufacturers engage with those suppliers. So again, what I've seen, simplified down, is that the CXOs, the board, will bring in the consultants at huge expense for 6 months. And they'll deliver the 5-year plan, but it doesn't tell you exactly how to do it. It's directional. It doesn't tell you how to do that. So what the business does, it gives the 5-year plan to the departments, to operations, to IT, to engineering, and they break it down into component parts, and then they'll come looking for solutions. So operations will look for automation, IT will look for software, integrators, infrastructure, engineering are looking for equipment, and software and integrators at the automation layer. And the relationship between the manufacturer and the supplier is peer-to-peer. So the client, again, AB InBev will negotiate with SAP and buy from SAP and then negotiate with Accenture and negotiate with someone else. It's all peer-to-peer. There's very little communication between the suppliers to the same end client. They just don't talk to each other. And again, having worked with them for them, even when they claim that they are partners, the behavior I've observed in meetings between partners is The salespeople tell each other the absolute bare minimum that they have to, because they don't want to divulge any information about who they know, who they're talking to, what the real information is. So even though people claim to be partners, it's quite clandestine in some ways in terms of the behavior that you see. And basically that status quo is why those big projects historically took longer, cost more, and delivered less value than the client expected. But everything I've talked about so far, in terms of the internal silos, the external silos, the complexity of manufacturing, and the engagement model, this is not new. This is industry 3. This has been a problem for 20, 30 years in terms of the behavior of the entire industry and how we've operated. But then in the last decade, we have had the advent of Industry 4 and all the technologies that go with it in terms of AI, or AR, VR, XR, whichever, robotics, mobility. And when Industry 4 became a thing, everybody made a land grab for it. It was a white space. So what you find in the Industry 4 ecosystem is a mix of well-established companies on the right, like Siemens, GE, SAP with Leonardo, making big plays into Industry 4. You have startups, obviously you guys in the room, with really cool technologies and ideas coming into the equation. And then the emergence of the hyperscalers in the last 10 years is just crazy in terms of what they've managed to achieve. So Industry 4, and then the question is, so where is Industry 4 now? So if we go back to 2016, where the World Economic Forum predicted great things. We're on the brink of a technological revolution, and it's going to deliver trillions by 2025, which is now 11 months away, and it is not delivering trillions at all. And as early as 2018, McKinsey put out this report that quoted Pilot Purgatory, which was mentioned in the panel discussion. So as early as 2018, the industry was recognizing Pilot Purgatory. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, still Pilot Purgatory. And if you go on the WEF's website, like I did yesterday, on the left-hand side, it still talks about Pilot Purgatory on the Industry 4 Global Lighthouse Network. So Industry 4 is not delivering what we expected, and yet we're using these technologies in our private lives. We're all kitted out with mobile devices, we're using these things. So why is it not being adopted in manufacturing and in industry? And my answer is simple. Nothing's changed. We're still behaving the way we have for 30 years. Consultants sell to the board, IT sell to the CIO, engineering company or OT vendors sell to the engineers. And operational excellence is this, weird mystical thing that nobody fully understands in the business in terms of how to do it. So all Industry 4 has done from the manufacturer's perspective is given them more technologies, more vendors, more people offering them value. They don't know where to begin. It's like a paralysis. So this is a 5-slide sort of summary of the status quo, as in this doesn't work. This is systemically wrong. It's not fit for purpose. So then the question comes, so what's the answer? It's one thing articulating a problem, but what's the solution? And I called it the Quorum principle. And it's quite a simple concept, but probably very hard to pull off in the fullness of time. But if you said to a manufacturer, right, okay, so which suppliers have the biggest impact on you achieving your objectives? And use the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. Who are the biggest ones? So if we go back to the layer cake of all the different influences a manufacturer, and they picked out the most important 5, then a lot of them would probably, if the scope and scale is the transformation of an enterprise, a pretty big scope scale to look at. But for that topic, they might say, well, it's our strategic consultants, because they're our advisors. It's the ERP, because that's where all our financial data is. It's our hyperscaler, because that's where the actual data is. It's the integrator that has to bolt it all together. And it's our automation standards in the factory, because that's where the plant data is. And SAP doesn't have quantities. It doesn't collect that data. It's given it from plant systems. So then if you said to the manufacturer, okay, so who is it specifically for you, Mr. Manufacturer? So the first one you pick might say, well, we use McKinsey. Our ERP is SAP. Our integrator is mainly Accenture. Our automation in the factories is predominantly Siemens, and our hyperscaler is Microsoft Azure. Now that quorum of 5, they can unlock your potential, but only if you as the manufacturer mandate it. By bringing them into the boardroom and saying, right, look, you 5, You are not going to work in isolation of each other anymore. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't suit my ends. So the manufacturer has to bring them into the boardroom and put the mandate on them and say, look, I need you to work together because individually you can't solve my problem because you're consultants, you're the ERP, you're the hyperscaler, you're the integrator, and you're the automation standards. So individually you can't do it, collectively you can. But the thing as well with the quorum principle is this might be the right combination to unlock that one. But if you go to a different manufacturer, it's infinitely interchangeable. You can just dial in the right set of vendors, and it doesn't always have to be digital transformation of an enterprise. This could be putting in a new production line in a factory. You change the requirement, you change the thing, but it's still based around collaborative working. So that's how it just infinitely changes throughout that. So like I said at the beginning, I came up with this idea 3.5 years ago when I was at SAP, and SAP was not the right place to try and develop this idea. But I have done a lot of podcasts. I had an article published in Forbes. I actually managed to get some of the vendors to play nicely together and collaborate with SAP and Carney and British Telecom and a few others, and keynotes at events and various other things. So I've been quite vocal in terms of trying to, develop this concept out there in the marketplace. But like I said, SAP wasn't the right place to go, which is why I went to Carney. But the thing I learned when I was at Carney is, and again, this is a simple explanation, I can't change the ecosystem or the system from within the system because they don't want to. It's alien to them. Why would they want to sit around the table with each other and play nicely? So the only way I could change it was to come out of the industry, and then nobody can stop me saying or doing what I want now. But when I did this, when I had this article published in Forbes back in 2021, there was a guy reached out to me who read it and he was working with the COP26 organization at the time. I said, this is really interesting because the challenge that the COP leadership are giving or asking is, can emissions be reduced whilst preserving or growing enterprise value and GDP? And he said, I think this has potentially got a way to do it. He said, because if you can figure out that answer for them, it could be one of the most valuable ideas of our time. If you can solve that riddle for the COP leadership and industrial leadership. And when people say, so when I do this presentation to manufacturers, as I have done now for 3.5 years, the feedback is always the same three things in the back to the presentation. So when I talk about the status quo and everything I talked about at the beginning, their feedback is usually, you've just described my business. That's exactly what we've done. That's exactly where we are. Then I present the combination lock, this collaborative way of working. And again, the feedback's always the same, more or less. Well, that's intuitively sensible. Why have we not done that before? And then the third question is the killer one. But how do you do it? How do you get those big vendors to sit together and collaborate in a way that's a win-win for them and us? It can't be done. Is it too difficult? And my answer is no, it isn't. There are examples out there of it. It can be done. So has anybody, show of hands, anybody familiar with X? Do you know what it is? One person. You only know because I told you. Claiming that he knows, obviously. So what Catena X is, it's the entire German automotive industry, both the OEMs like Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and their supplier ecosystem of suppliers working together, collaborating to make the German automotive industry more globally competitive with their competitors in Japan or North America, wherever it may be. So go and look at the website. But as of a few days ago, when I downloaded it, 1st of February, there are currently 169 members in there. So again, Accenture, BMW down there, BASF, Henkel, Capgemini. It is a lot of the people that I've worked with or for. So there's 3 pages of companies, SAP and Siemens are both in there. If you go on their website, Christian Klein, the CEO of SAP, is quoting something, and then it's Roland Busch from Siemens quoting something. So again, there's a classic example or a simple example of an entire industry can do it. So if an industry can do it in an entire geography of Germany, then I'm sure a single enterprise can do it. And I've worked on projects where we did do that sort of collaborative working. And the other thing I point people at is this, obviously the UN Sustainable Development Goals, number 17, partnership. And specifically, I was a bit of an anorak and went and looked at this. 17.16 highlighted in bold, multi-stakeholder partnerships that mobilize and share knowledge, expertise, technology, and financial resources. Again, if that's not a definition of what I'm advocating with this collaborative approach with Quorum, and again, I should hopefully in this audience be preaching to the choir or converted in what you're doing with 100 plus, with 4 or 5 big CPGs working together with startups. It's like if you got a lot don't like this presentation, then I'm giving up. And then the thing in terms of like, well, why have I left a very well-paid job to go independent? Because I believe in this. And the reason is, this will never, ever see the light of day or go anywhere or achieve anything without mandate from the board of a manufacturer. Because departmentally, you can't do it. Engineering couldn't pull it off. IT couldn't pull it off. Operations can't pull it off because they'll get internal resistance from the other parties. And they also don't know each other's domains well enough to dictate what SAP should do from an engineering standpoint and vice versa. So the mandate has to be a board level mandate. So that's why I've left Carney and I'm going after the board of manufacturers. I need to get this slide deck to the board of a manufacturer. And when I do, it's a binary choice. Do it or don't do it. They either like the idea or they won't, and it's just, okay, move on to the next one. But the thing I always leave people with is a quote from someone who was part of an industrial revolution, Henry Ford. And I always leave them with this one. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And that's what I'm saying. What we've done for the last 30 years doesn't work. It's not optimal. So if we carry on trying to do that and don't change anything, we're still going to have pilot purgatory, things that don't scale, departmental silos inside manufacturers, an ecosystem that it's advantageous for you to be siloed as a manufacturer because then they can sell their stuff and it doesn't fit together very well. So that's where I'm at in terms of the presentation. I wanted to keep an eye on the time as well. So just a bit of thought leadership, a point of view, an opinion I'm sharing. So thank you very much for your time.